We are excited to have this conversation with you all today. Um, and as I mentioned, this is a very big growing interest nationally around principal apprenticeships, but there are still a lot of questions about what this looks like in practice. And today, we really want to understand and lean in on what to focus on when it comes to the implementation realities, and not just why apprenticeships matter, especially principal apprenticeships, but really what it takes to actually build it, structure it, fund it, and sustain these programs across districts, higher ed partners, and states. We know districts and states are navigating really challenging leadership landscapes right now across the country. We're seeing, of course, leadership pipeline shortages, smaller candidate pools for principal positions, staffing and capacity concerns, and also some real tension around balancing teacher retention with leadership development. Many districts want to create stronger leadership pathways, but they're also really trying to avoid pulling strong teachers out of the classroom too quickly or creating additional staffing strains. At the same time, we are also seeing that states and districts are asking, how do we create leadership pathways that are more sustainable, more job embedded, and also more aligned to workforce systems and funding opportunities? That's really where principal apprenticeships are entering the conversation. And one thing that we are learning quickly through at the Pathways Alliance, and also with the technical assistance cohort that we are currently engaging in this year, is that this work does mean a lot, and it does make a lot of sense, again, regionally, and not always district by district. In many places, just, there simply may not be enough principal openings or leadership demands, honestly, within a single district to sustain a standalone apprenticeship model. So we're seeing stronger momentum when districts, higher ed institutions, state agencies, and also regional collaboratives come together to build a shared infrastructure. That coalition approach really matters because this work really touches multiple systems at once. We're getting educator preparation, licensure, workforce development. There's some funding pieces and also some mentorship, and also a unique staffing strategy. Today's conversation will really ground us in what we are actively seeing across the field through state and district cohorts, a few case studies that we've been following, and a lot of the technical assistance work that we've been providing as well in this space. By the end of today's webinar, we hope that participants will walk away with a clearer understanding of what principal apprenticeships really look like operationally, hearing some of the emerging lessons from early implementation efforts, and also some examples of how states and districts are structuring partnerships. You'll also be able to hear about and gain a little bit understanding about some of the current funding opportunities connected to this work, and also a better understanding of where the field is and still navigating some of these challenges and some of the unanswered questions that you all may have, and that we're hearing are popping up consistently. We also want to be honest and say that this work is still evolving. There is not one single model that is really outlined throughout this webinar. We want you to understand that different states and districts are approaching this differently based on local context and policy environments, and also labor relationships, higher ed partnerships, and also leadership needs. But we are seeing that there is a growing recognition that leadership preparation models alone are not really meeting the scale or the sustainability that challenges and states are facing right now. So with that framing, I do want to spend a couple of minutes grounding us in what principal apprenticeships actually look like operationally, and what we're seeing emerging across the field. At At a level, principal apprenticeships are really designed to create more structured job embedded pathways into school leadership. Instead of leadership preparation happening largely through coursework and often disconnected through daily practices, apprenticeship models really connect this intentionally. As I mentioned before, there will be opportunities for on the job learning, mentorship, and coaching, and also a progressive leadership responsibility. And it will be aligned with related instruction through, of course, higher education partners and things that we're already seeing happening in states and districts. What makes principal apprenticeships different is that this is happening in the real realities of schools and districts and states as well. In practice, we hope that programs are structuring this work based on what their state policy needs are, what district sizes they have, their different labor environments, and also higher education partnerships, as I mentioned before. So what we're seeing is that some programs are embedding apprentices into assistant principal pipelines. We're seeing that using aspiring leader cohorts. Some are also aligning residency style experiences with apprenticeship structures. And then also some folks are also building regional models where multiple districts share infrastructure or leadership development supports. One thing that we continue to hear from districts is that mentorship structure really matters significantly. We believe that strong principal apprenticeships require experienced mentors who are not just strong practitioners, but who are also prepared to support adult learners through coaching, feedback, and leadership development. That's becoming a major implementation conversation nationally. And we're hearing things like, how do you support mentor principals with the time, training, and capacity needed to do the work as well? And again, through our what we've been hearing through our conversations and through some of the support that we've been offering, it's really how to emerge that and ground these conversations around sustainability. And across the field, we are almost seeing like common questions emerge as like who should serve as the intermediary, who should this sit at the district level, state agency, or higher ed institution. And honestly, these are exactly the kinds of questions that we want to hear. And these are the exact things that we try to focus on in our technical assistance cohort to be able to provide the support through design. And we are doing that at Pathways Alliance through peer learning, again, case studies, office hours, and a lot of shared problem solving because we are trying to get to the root of these questions and be able to provide resources to the field. And one important lesson that I must say that we have learned so far is that there's no single organization that can carry this work alone. The strongest models that we are seeing do involve strong district and higher education alignment, state support, workforce and apprenticeship expertise, and also some clear operational coordination across partners. Partnership is important here. That's also why the national guideline standards matter so much right now is they also support us in providing a shared quality framework while still allowing flexibility for local implementation. From there, I will transition to my colleagues who will provide examples from emerging spaces in the field right now around what implementation actually looks like on the ground and how we can continue to support and provide a little bit deeper context. So I hope my framing was helpful. I will now pass it on to my colleagues, Jack and Colleen, who will provide some additional framing right now to what we're seeing across the field.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sabrina.
Sabrina. Go ahead, Jack.
Well, at a high level, we know that many states have moved on teacher apprenticeships much earlier than principal apprenticeships. And so there's a temptation to think that they are largely the same. And there are a few elements that make principal apprenticeships pretty fundamentally different from teacher apprenticeships. One is the scale of need and the capacity to manage these programs. If you think about the average need for teachers across a state or a region or even a district, it is substantially larger just by the sheer numbers alone, than the principal need may be. And yet we know the principal need is a really important one to fill. And so as we're thinking about program design, a lot of states are thinking through, how do we ensure, for instance, that a principal candidate that goes through that principalship has a vacancy waiting for them at the end? How do we make sure that we can place them, particularly in places that are rural, and don't have the economies of scale, say, as a larger district in that state? And so structurally, it sort of begs this question that Sabrina mentioned earlier, which is, where does the management of the program sit? Is it a statewide or regional program? What is the role of the state to ensure not just program quality, but placement reliability for those candidates who are successful? And of course, that means then asking ourselves the question, is it right for individual districts to build these programs themselves? Does that make sense? Does that lead to the highest and best outcome that we all would want, which is not only a high quality program, but ensuring that candidates who have done the hard work of participating in the program and completing the program successfully can get the job that they're seeking? Colleen, do you want to talk a little bit more about specific examples that you're seeing?
So sure. One of the things that we've been thinking about in New York is that pathways into school leaders or school building leaders really help develop have the ability to really develop lots of people, right? So yes, you have one principal, you might have an assistant principal, you might have a dean. I guess I would encourage everybody to think more broadly about who utilizes leadership skills within a school district, including teacher leaders, because having that certification doesn't always mean you have to leave the classroom, right? You could be an instructional coach, you could be a lead member of a team. You could be doing a lot of different things. And teachers can pursue this certification through an apprenticeship model and really be prepared to go on then and do leadership work, whether they leave the classroom or not. So I just want you to kind of think broadly about it. In New York, we do tend to do it in a more targeted, contextual, individual district way. But we also now are introducing an intermediary model, which will be more regional or statewide in nature, so we can make sure that people that want to come into this pathway are aware of the opportunities and can.
And Colleen, one thing I would add that I know has been on your mind in New York, and as state leaders consider launching a principal apprenticeship, is who and this is particularly a question, I think, for state agencies. Who or what is the additional capacity that the agency is going to bring on board for two essential components of the apprenticeship? One is the design, from not only the who does what when to ensure a successful principal apprenticeship program, but also in the implementation. Part two is, who makes sure it's going well? Who is on the ground making sure that the candidate is getting all of the kinds of supports and touch points that are owed to them via the program? Who is understanding what's working well, what needs to be adjusted based on what's not working well, and sort of leading those adjustments with all of the key partners in real time to ensure the candidates are having the kind of experience everybody wants. That often is capacity that is sort of generally people are aware of that it's needed, and it's often a place where we don't see the kind of planning, both on the funding side, but also just the literal, who are the people who are going to do that work, and what are the systems that are going to support doing that work really well at scale.
Well, I think one of the things we need to consider, Jack, when we look at that is that the higher ed partners in this particular trade or apprenticeship um, have a lot of influence because they are the certification pathway, and almost all the states require certification to be an administrator or building leader. So there are fundamental checks and balances in place, and part of that partnership is going to be building those out to make sure that what the higher ed is requiring to award the certification aligns. In New York State, we require a 450-hour internship, which is just not enough time, number one. And number two, it's typically a teacher who's doing it on um, their planning period and an hour after school and maybe a couple weeks in the summer. So it doesn't really immerse you like the apprenticeship does in the day-to-day 360-degree work of a building administrator. So it doesn't work to really prepare that person to then become the leader they need to be when they get their first office. So thinking about so the nice thing is because it aligns to certification, I think that we have some pieces. Everybody's going to start with pieces in place as they develop that partnership with higher ed to make sure that things are aligned and the experiences are actually contributing to district needs. We actually had one of our state universities design a program specific to apprenticeship so that the candidate could be working on a project to meet their coursework and requirements that was actually grounded in district priorities and something that the district wants to see. So it gives them a little more return on the investment. Besides having the person, they're actually getting a benefit from the related instruction.
Yeah, agreed, Colleen. I think everything you just said is a fantastic example of why New York is lucky to have Ed Hub New York and you to do the sort of to understand at a very detailed level and then sort of bubble up the learnings at a macro level that need to be considered when building these programs. And it's a good note to say for state leaders or regional leaders who are considering, particularly those who are in sort of official government positions, is there a sort of nonprofit intermediary that you can work with to provide that sort of detailed level of coordination and expertise that often goes beyond what regular sort of state or local agencies can achieve? If we can go to the next slide, there are a couple of places that we want to highlight. Principal apprenticeships obviously are in their fairly nascent stages, which is why we're all on this webinar now. And a couple of states to highlight. The first is North Dakota. They were the first to move on a principal apprenticeship program. They have a partnership between state agencies, a couple of institutes of higher education, and 7 districts. And so far, the results are strong, 100% completion rate and 80% placement into school leadership. Again, I think those numbers are strong and underscore something we said earlier around this challenge of making sure we have placements for people who complete. And so in the design phase, it's important to obviously consider how are we going to ensure that everybody who is successful can get the job that they're seeking? Virginia is another state to highlight. I think we have some folks from the great Commonwealth of Virginia here on the call. It has a funding grant through the state apprenticeship expansion, and the Department of Labor awarded the Virginia DOE a little over $500,000 in September of 25 to launch a pilot program. And they have 37 apprentices, 6 educator preparation programs across 17 school divisions. So Virginia already achieving a pretty significant scale here out of the gate. And perhaps both of these places are places that we can learn from if you are looking to establish your own apprenticeship.
Thank you for that. And I also just want to name and ask you all, the U.S. Department of Labor has approved the National Guideline Standards for K-12 apprenticeship programs for the Pathways Alliance. There's also another framework that was approved as well. So again, these frameworks are again in unison, and we want to move this work together as a collective. And this framework really provides states and school districts the opportunity for a roadmap to develop some high quality registered principal apprenticeship pathways to ensure that school leaders are prepared to anchor really the next generation of educator pipelines. I would love to hear from you all how folks can use the national guideline standards for principal apprenticeships. What are some of the conversations that should be had around this framework? And truthfully, how can this be used to scale models and also create some models and programs that don't already exist or that may be in the implementation phase? And anyone can go here. I didn't call out anybody specific, but
Sabrina, maybe could you repeat the question one more time, and then maybe we can I can sort of
yes,
get us
we
started.
would love, yes, no problem. We would just love to hear really how you all uh, suggest folks should use the national guideline standards in practice. How do the national guideline standards really help with consistency in the local context and allows folks to be flexible in how they're using them? And also, like, how do you all feel like it would lend itself to supporting principal apprenticeships?
Jack, I can jump in.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it, Aisha.
Thanks. And I've learned so much already just from Jack and Colleen. Something we're realizing very quickly across the cohorts is that so many of the districts and states we're trying to build this principled apprenticeship without this shared framework. So everyone's believing in the concept, but there were just like these different interpretations of what quality should look like, how programs should be structured, how partners should work together. And I think that's where the national guideline standards become really important. It provides this common framework for designing and implementing high quality principal apprenticeship programs. And I think what makes them really powerful is they can create structure without forcing every state, every district into the exact same model. So the goal is not standardization just for the sake of uniformity. The goal is like coherence, quality, alignment. So I think at a practical level, the NGS helps partners answer some of those foundational questions. So what roles do different partners play? I'm really learning a lot about what systems need to exist to support the sustainability. Even things like mentorship, related instruction, on-the-job learning, how do those pieces align? And also, of course, what are the core components of a high quality principal apprenticeship program? I think what we're seeing is that programs that are using the NGS, if the way I imagine it is using it less as a checklist and more as a real design framework, right? So you can use it to structure new apprenticeship pathways, strengthen existing leadership pipelines, align preparation programs with your district priorities, or guide conversations between workforce and education partners. I think really what the NGS does is help move conversations from these like abstract ideas into operational planning.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Aisha. I would double down on what you just closed with there. Um, this is while principal apprenticeships are new, principal development programs or certification programs are not. They exist in every state, many of them, and and so everyone's got their own slightly different way of thinking about principal development. And if you were starting from scratch, say without the NGS in place, it would be perhaps a deeply collaborative and elongated process to develop the framework to get these programs launched, versus saying, here is something that probably mostly aligns with everybody's perspective and is officially, sanctioned by the USDOE and USDOL. Maybe we start here, and that is often a way to sort of shortcut getting to the more important collaborative points that Aisha named, which are actual programmatic design. So the how we're going to implement these standards versus the what the standards are in the first place.
Thank you. And Jack, I have a follow-up question for you. What would you say, like, I guess, what are you hearing from states? What does it look like to actually get started if that was a question folks were asking today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sabrina. Um, Generally speaking, I think a lot of states understand there is a need. They come to that understanding through lived experience and anecdotes, understanding from their friends who are principals or district leaders. We need, we need principals. And generally the first step is asking a set of questions, which is how do we clarify and codify what the actual need for principals is across the state, if this is the unit, right? If the state is the unit, so that we can then build a program with scale in mind. And and often I think what we're learning is states have a decent amount of data at their fingertips, but it's often imperfect. And so that's okay. It's a perfectly fine way to get started, but the sheer effort to collect that baseline needs data is often pretty illuminating. And I think demonstrates and shows state leaders like what are the trends? Where are there places that are, really having a hard time of recruiting and keeping and developing their principals, and what are the places that maybe aren't having as hard of a time but still are in some kind of need. The second thing is the question of who needs to be at the table in the designation of the or in the design of the program. Sabrina, you said it very well earlier. One of the things we're learning is that you can't do this work alone. And so sort of sifting through like who are the people that need to be at the table at the beginning, who are the people that need to be invited once the design is a little further along, who are the people that are, a third wave of folks that have to be invited is really important. And then thirdly is assessing what currently exists in terms of developing the principal pipeline for the state and understanding like how do we want to be different? What are the key differences in the apprenticeship design that will allow more people to sign up, a higher quality experience, along, greater retention rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And often I think people have some pretty clear ideas what those opportunities are.
So the
Thank
one
you.
thing that I would jump in and add to Jack, the plus and is that as you're aligning your partners and as you're thinking about who needs to be at the table, if you live like I do in a collectively bargained state, it's really important to have your union members or your unions at the table. What's interesting is it may not be the union you think. Often, people pursuing administrative degrees are teachers on special assignment. So it would be the teachers union as opposed to the administrators union, but having everybody in the conversation so that you can develop that pathway and they feel like they're part of the conversation from the start is going to be really important.
Yeah, and I just want to like echo Colleen and Jack, that piece. I think so many folks like, where do you start? I think the first step is not trying to build everything at once, right? So bringing the right partners to the table and assessing the existing leadership pipelines, your current preparation structures, workforce partnerships, your local capacity, right? What we have seen is that programs that are moving too quickly without that alignment then struggle later with sustainability or operational coordination. And then to Colleen's point, that just the alignment across partners, um, different ops institutions are operating with different priorities, timelines, even like what does success look like for us? I think that's where the NGS becomes really important because it creates that shared language across the partners. So whether you're a district leader or a workforce intermediary, I think the standards can help clarify those roles, the expectations, also those points of alignment.
Thank you. You guys touched on some really great points. And before we do a dive into where I'm sure folks, their brains are wondering about the funding pieces, I do have a final question on like how states and districts can adapt models to their local context. And I'm wondering, you guys have mentioned some great things, and I'm wondering if there's any other tips or tools that folks could walk away with understanding how they could use the NGS to have these conversations with some of their state leaders or their district leaders.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sabrina. And I think once again, if the sort of decision or the first mover here is like a state agency, once folks determine who needs to be at the table, who's going to have really sort of strong thoughts on what essential elements of the principal apprenticeship will be, putting the guideline standards in front of those various stakeholders in, a meeting or two to get their feedback is a great place to start. I think I've heard from many folks that it was sort of surprising how few conversations it took to build consensus, because generally, standards like the NGS are pretty thoughtful, and have a lot of those elements that people would look for. But nonetheless, that's a great place to start to build that kind of consensus on ideally what are the set of standards or experiences we want all candidates to have.
Yeah, I think, and probably not the answer everyone wants to hear, but there's that like a blueprint for implementation, right? Rural district may structure this work really differently than maybe a larger urban district. A state-led model would be different from a district, maybe like more of a consortium model. I think, just from the NGS standpoint, it's not about replication. It's helping systems build models that are, that are the maintain the quality, and are responsive to that local context. I think one of the most important shifts that we're seeing right now is that principal apprenticeships are moving from isolated innovation to more structured systems building work. And I think the NGS can help make that transition possible, by giving that field a shared foundation, and obviously while still honoring the local context and the flexibility needed.
Thank you all. And as I promised, we will segue and I'll pass it to Colleen, who will really talk to us about some of the funding and policy and state infrastructure that's available right now, and really walk us through what they look like, some of our deadlines, and of course, some supports that are available.
So, just so you know, that what's really interesting about this work, or I find really interesting, is that states are handling it so differently, right? And so it really meets the context of the state. In some states, the Department of Labor is leading the work, and some the Department of Education is leading the work, and some it's a partnership, and some it's a third party or an intermediary. And so really defining, understanding how your process works as a state agency or as an OA state, an Office of Apprenticeship federal agency, is going to be important. And then because that like lays out the process that you're going to go through as you develop a program. Everybody asked about funding, and funding is super important. I love the fact that funding was towards the end of the webinar, because you have to want to do this work. And like every other sector that has utilized apprenticeships, there's a return on investment. And so, because you're building your workforce, and so electricians, when they need electricians, they hire electrician apprentices. And so there is a local investment. It's a little bit different, obviously, because we're using public dollars. It's not like we're for profit companies. And so these are tax dollars. And so we need to understand that this is high quality work, that there's going to be a return on investment, and that it's going to be an investment well made. So there is some money to support this work. But I always lead with the fact that there has to almost be a commitment of local funding in order to really think about this work in a sustainable way, because these grants, as you know, come and go. Right now, I don't want to panic anybody. If you're not in the process of writing the TQP or the TSL or the seed grant, take a deep breath, put it in your Google search to get notifications when it's released again. They are due like June 1st, June 9th. And so there's about a 2-week window at the most left. They're pretty complicated RFPs. The TQP and the seed grant are often applied for by the higher ed institutions. So as you've identified your partners, those in New York anyway tend to lead the TQP and the seed. It can be a not-for-profit, but just so you know, the TSL grant actually this year, all 3 of these have competitive priorities that connect to apprenticeships. So that's a trend in the federal government. The grants are actually from the Department of Education, but they were released through the Department of Labor. And they are looking to build both teachers and leaders, as I said, through apprenticeship models, as well as some other programs like strategic staffing. Department of Labor funding opportunities are also going to be unique to your state, depending on whether you're a state agency state or an OA state. So there's usually apprenticeship expansion grant funding, or SAEF funding, that comes from the Department of Labor. If you are a state agency state, your state applies for that funding and then determines the priorities. And it's almost like pass-through funding from the feds. In New York, we've had 4 different rounds of apprenticeship expansion grant funding. It usually can support up to half of wages or tuition assistance. So just so you know, that if you're an OA state or live in an OA state, I think you can apply for that SAEF grant directly. What else can I tell you about current funding opportunities? When you are on any of these grants, like I said, partnerships are important. So if you're starting this work and you're looking at a year down the road and saying, we want to be ready to go after one of these funding opportunities, I would strongly suggest that you have your partners in place and you think about it. The RFPs don't usually change a whole lot from year to year. So even if you read through it now and thought about what it is you wanted to identify and think about it in line with the NGS standards, you could really kind of build it inclusive of what potential funding streams may be. Considerations for, so when you rate different funding streams, the SAEF, and I think the seed grant and TQP and TSL can support direct support to apprentices. Unlike in our ABA grant, we could not provide money directly to apprentices. And so thinking about how you want to structure that, we tend to braid resources creatively. So if we can provide employer incentive funding to the employer, and they typically pay, or they typically, if they want to use that for like tuition support, they can arrange their budget. So basically they're moving things from one budget line to another. So there's ways to put it together so that that employer can get what they need and also provide the apprentice with what they need. Oh, thanks for putting those in the chat.
Thank you so much. Before we get into next steps and some things to walk away with, we do want to hold some space and time for any questions you may all have. We've shared some a lot of information today. But we also want to answer any questions that you may have or around supports, around funding, around how to use the NGS. And we've also shared some additional resources with you all in the chat as well. So we'll open up for some Q&A. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A chat box, or you may send them in the chat as well. All right, I think you guys did such an amazing job that no one has any questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, okay. Um, thank you. We do have one question. I'm wondering if principal residencies for rural communities are prevalent at this time.
We have one in New York State that is in a small rural district, and they took a teacher that they wanted to, who had an interest in becoming part of the administrative team. And he is doing a 2-year apprenticeship as a building leader. He's a teacher on special assignment. So he's getting his teacher pay, and plus he gets a small stipend. And what really removed the barrier for this particular candidate is in New York, you also get tuition assistance if you're at a state university for this certification. And so that removed that barrier for him. And I have a, which I'll put in the chat. We did a case series, and the case series uh, highlights this particular program. And so I can add the link to the case series about this particular small rural school.
Our next question is, are there cohorted opportunities for apprentices in these models? If so, what do they look like given the demands on leaders?
I'm sorry, what was that question, Sabrina?
Yeah, are there cohorted opportunities for apprentices in these models? If so, what do they look like given the demand on leaders?
Is the question the demand on leaders who might be mentoring the candidates or the demand on leaders who are the candidates themselves? Maybe we could answer both.
Yeah, take a shot at both, Jack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is if cohorting is important to you, you can build that into the design process. And it begs certain questions about what do you want the cohorting, what do you think the addition of the cohorting element provides? Does it help you save costs with the universities? Does it help you build some sort of camaraderie and built-in support system for candidates? And then if, depending on the reasons why you're doing the cohorting, then asking yourselves the question in the design phase, okay, well, how do we create the kind of cohort experience that we want? Because merely putting people together in the same classes at the same time may not be the kind of value added culturally or otherwise that you're looking for. So are you bringing people together a couple of times a year from around the state to be in the same physical space for training together? Like how are you going to facilitate that that kind of cohort experience? But it's certainly available under the model. It is not a requirement, but it's certainly available. In terms of the demand on leaders, Again, I think a lot of this comes down to the design choices that you make. If the question is what is the demand going to be on leaders, say it's a sitting leader mentoring an apprentice principal, then that all gets baked into the design. What does mentoring look like? What does mentoring training look like? What is the role of that mentor versus, say, the university or district leadership or an outside intermediary, nonprofit that's providing direct support? You can build out where the capacity needs to sit to develop that candidate to account for any workload concerns that you might have. If the question is what is the demand on for candidates who are in leadership roles themselves, again, that does go back to the design phase. And I mean, frankly, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. Being an apprentice candidate is not an easier pathway. It might be better financially. It might be better from a quality perspective. It might be more practically and clinically driven. It is not easier. And so being upfront with candidates about what the workload is that's required and where they can get support is likely the best way to make sure both in the selection process and while they're going through the experience, they have a proper understanding of what it's going to take for them to complete.
Thank you for that context. It does not look like we have any more questions here. So before we close, I do want to take a moment to recap some of the biggest lessons that we're hearing across the field. And that's through the technical assistance work that we've been doing, state conversations, and also some of the district implementation efforts as well that we've been hearing. And that's really that a lot of this work does require some strong operational coordination, and that programs are not just building leadership pathways, they're building sustainable pathways. And that's coordinating across multiple entities and higher ed institution, workforce systems, state agencies. And then we're also learning that principal apprenticeships cannot just mirror other apprenticeships that we've seen, and that although there are some important lessons that we've seen from teacher apprenticeships, but principal apprenticeship pathways operate differently because, again, we're really scaling and staffing realities that are tied to school leadership positions that we're seeing today. We are consistently hearing and understanding that states and districts want implementation support, not just high-level conversations. And we were hopeful that we were able to offer some of that insight today around operational examples, funding guidance, partnership structures, mentorship models, and really what does it look like to register and have that support as well. And then also opportunities to directly learn from peers that are already navigating this work. And finally, one of the biggest lessons that I think we've taken away from this session today is that, and I mentioned it earlier, no single organization can carry this work alone. And I think my colleagues have reiterated this as well. Some of the strongest efforts that we have seen to build strong apprenticeship models do require a strong level of collaboration across multiple entities. And really, that's a critical piece in this work. And it really sits at a really good intersection of different points and folks to work with to ensure that sustainability and quality go hand in hand. So as we wrap up today, I do want to just thank all of our speakers and my colleagues here on this call and everyone who was able to join this conversation. I know we covered a lot today, but I do hope one of the biggest takeaways is that principal apprenticeships, again, are not just creating another leadership program. This work is really about building stronger and more sustainable leadership pipelines through deeper alignment across education, workforce systems, higher ed, district and state practices. So I hope folks leave with just a few markers that we named today. The national guideline standards really provide a great shared framework that can still allow flexibility for local context. states and districts do not have to navigate this work alone. And also partnership and coordination is critical. And for those who are interested in continuing to engage with the Pathways Alliance, we do have several opportunities coming up. You will hear more about our case studies that we were doing in this work. We will follow up on funding conversations and additional webinars. We do ask that you subscribe to our YouTube to keep track of our webinars, and also visit us on LinkedIn and all of our other socials like Blue Sky and X. And also please feel free to visit the Pathways Alliance website, where we, again, the national guideline standards for K-12 apprenticeships, teaching and principal, and there is a draft for tutors on there as well. So we encourage folks to continue to connect with us across states and across sectors, because as I mentioned, one of the most valuable things we're seeing right now is peer learning and collaboration. So I do want to acknowledge everyone for joining us today. And as we continue to evolve this work and to continue to build the momentum around printable apprenticeships, it is very real. We are excited to continue to support the field and the programs to move from exploration to implementation and scale. And we thank you all for being here today. Please feel free to continue to connect with us at the Pathways Alliance, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Have a great day, everyone.